A Lincoln Memory. In the early 40s, when we moved to Arlington, Virginia, our new home was on Lee Boulevard, U.S. Route 50. Actually, we lived on a frontage road of small brick and clapboard houses, single family and duplexes. And behind us, I soon discovered, beyond a peeling white board fence at the far edge of our yard, was yet another road, a rocky dirt pathway, which meandered in front of the neat but run-down houses where, quote, colored people lived. I don't remember having an awareness of colored people before we moved from our pleasant residential neighborhood outside of Boston. They must have been there, in the city at least, in the background somewhere, but I never saw them. It was wartime. My father became an air raid warden, making his rounds with a helmet and shielded flashlight at night. We put up blackout curtains, and during the day, after school, I helped plant a victory garden in the dusty soil. The man downstairs was an alcoholic, and late at night he'd noisily dig in the garden, a lantern casting his spooky shadows on the white fence. That's where I first saw the small black faces peering at me through the cracks in the fence and smiling shyly. When things started to grow, we shared. They must have had a garden too. Over time, we met a few of the adults behind the fence, polite, not quite neighbors. I remember one of the men building rough sawn shelves for my mother, and once in a while, I began to play with their kids. My folks commented on that, at least my mother did, because my dad was at work when she must have watched us from a window, tossing a ball or sledding on the street in the rusty snow. "Why are you playing with them?" she said. I don't know what she was talking about. I somehow never made the connection, that there was a difference, that I never saw those kids in my classes at school or at the grocery store. Where did they study? Where did they shop? I didn't know we were segregated for sure until I rode the bus between Arlington and Washington, D.C., across the river. A sign above the driver said, "Colored seat from the rear." Of course, public restrooms were for whites and coloreds, but at 10, it took me a while to put it all together, including my new teachers requiring me to say "sir" and "ma'am" when I raised my hand to answer a question. It was all strange and confusing, the southern niceties, and unexpected. I used to hike a lot, often alone, from our house to Arlington Cemetery, where the military dead were buried. I'd take a brown bag lunch and sit on the grass and look at the rows and rows of neat white crosses, and eat the peanut butter and jelly or cream cheese and olive sandwiches my mother had lovingly wrapped. She used to include small packages of nuts and raisins and containers of Jell-O, or salad and a plastic fork for hikes in school. I was embarrassed to be different from my classmates, who only had plain sandwiches. But when they saw them, they wanted to trade with me for the special snacks, and I appreciated my mother. Sometimes I'd walk to Lee's mansion, which sits on a hill overlooking Memorial Bridge and the Lincoln Memorial itself in the distance, and the tomb of the unknown soldier. I'd count the orchestrated steps the impeccably attired guards took, and watch with awe and innocent reverence the changing of the guard. Even with blackout curtains at night, telephone party lines, ration stamps, nothing seemed real. Except for the segregation, which was real enough. The laws in Washington and Virginia were different. When I took the bus in Washington, I saw, quote, colored people sitting wherever they wanted. But things changed once you crossed the river. I was on the bus one day, going home from sightseeing in our nation's capital. The bus was about half full, with a matronly, proud-looking colored woman sitting towards the front, bundles beside her and at her feet. Suddenly I became aware that the driver had pulled over just before the bridge, right across the street from the Lincoln Memorial. I glanced around to see what was happening. Nothing seemed amiss, but then after a moment or two, the driver turned in his seat, glaring pointedly at the woman. For a few moments she didn't move. People began to get restless. The driver continued to glare. The colored woman remained where she was, meeting his gaze, but she shifted her position a little bit. Finally, reconciled, she lowered her eyes, gathered her bundles, and slowly shuffled to the rear of the bus. The driver ground the gears, and the bus lurched away from the curb abruptly and started over the bridge before she was completely seated. I wanted to get up and go sit with her, but something held me back. Uncertainty, maybe. fear. What would I do if the driver stopped the bus again because of me? I just sat there, frozen in embarrassment. Sometime later, as an NLRB trial examiner, administrative law judge, my father volunteered to go to the Deep South and register black voters during the formative civil rights movement. I remember there was a sense of danger about his going. I remember I was proud of him. I tried to play with the black kids again, but they couldn't come out. I guess their mother had seen us together.